Welcome everyone to our study, and as always, kindly generate the motivation for undertaking this study with the wish and the commitment to establishing all sentient beings temporarily in happiness and ultimately at the level of perfect freedom and enlightenment. So this is why we're doing this, and in doing so, we're recognizing that the study that we're undertaking has universal relevance, is a proper science that recognizes the causes of confusion and also what are the causes for freeing ourselves from this. So as per the Four Noble Truths, then, we understand where the suffering comes from and we're proceeding to do something about it. And so in that process, then, studying the Dharma, enabling us then to put it into practice, is an essential part of that journey. So presently then we're looking at the Vajrayana teaching from the instructions of Chögyam Trungpa, the teachings from Chögyam Trungpa, Journey Without Goal, the Tantric Wisdom of the Buddha. And we'll begin with invoking the lineage. So much of our journey is really informed by devotion to the teachers. So invoking the lineage then makes so much sense. Let's just see. 574, 584. Can you remind me? 584? Okay. Okay. So in invoking the lineage, we're invoking those who have gone before us, and we also recognize that their situation and our situation might be different on an external level, but inwardly, in terms of dealing with the basic ground of confusion, neurosis, neurotic action, and the patterns that come with that, and the confusion that's basic to that, then we share the same, you could say, starting point. So in that sense, invoking the lineage is both invoking those that have gone before us as an example of how to do it, and we're also invoking them in terms of reflecting the awakened nature that abides spontaneously within us. So we're not just externalizing them as remarkable individuals, but we're also identifying them as abiding within our own sanity, within our own ground. So we don't only think of them as external, and that's also where we have this notion, think of me. If they were sort of just historical persons, then calling out would probably be rather futile, but in the sense of them abiding within, then when we call to them, think of me, this is actually touching the ground of sanity within ourselves. So specifically then here we've covered the lineage from the primordial Buddha, embodied in the form of Amitabha, down through the lineage of Padmasambhava and his consort Yeshe Tsogya, and now presently then invoking the lineages that emerge from these two founding figures, really, of Tantric Buddhism in Tibet. And these are then the gurus of the Karma and Dhamma lineages. The two main lineages that you have in the teachings that come from Padmasambhava and Yeshe Tsogya, what is known as the Nyingma lineage, and which also is associated with the triad of Padmasambhava, King Trison Detsen, and the abbot Shantarakshita. Now this tradition then consists of two styles of lineage. One is the Karma, which is the orally transmitted lineage from master to master, and then the Dhamma or treasure lineage, which are the teachings that were hidden for the future by Padmasambhava, seeing that the time wasn't quite ripe, then Padmasambhava instructed his students to reveal particular teachings later on the basis of actual physical treasure troves and hidden objects, as well as also treasures that were hidden in the mind of the students. You could say that then emerged later in terms of visions and memories and so forth. So these two transmission lineages then are basic to the great masters of the Nyingma lineage. And so it says, Gurus of the Karma and Dhamma lineages, think of me. Look upon me from the wisdom realm of unity. Break through the dark dungeon of my confused mind. Make the sun of realization arise. So we supplicate them, coming from the wisdom realm of unity is the place where there's not the confused belief in solid existence, but understanding this paradox or this ambiguity of appearance and emptiness, the manifest that yet cannot be grasped. And so in that recognition, there's not a question of nothingness, but there's certainly also not the question of being entangled in appearances. And so this is a place of wisdom that celebrates then a direct understanding of the nature of reality. And this is then, from there, then we request that they look to us and enable us, bless us to break through the confused mind and enable the sun of realization to arise. So let's do one more. Omniscient Trimewerser, think of me, look upon me from the realm of the 5 spontaneous wisdom lights. Help me to strengthen my primordially pure mind and master the 4 stages of Ati Yoga. So the omniscient Trimewerser was Longchenpa, who lived from 1308 to 1363, and we invoke him, but again, not merely as a historical person, but also as somebody abiding within ourselves. Hence, Trimewerser abides within us. Trimewerser is also, in terms of his life and legacy, seen as the one who brought together all the traditions of Ati Yoga, and so he holds the lineages from Padmasambhava and Vimalamitra, and also from Vajrayana, and also sometimes we also include in what we regard as the Ati teachings, the ones that come from the 3rd Karmapa. So we invoke him and again see him as abiding within the realm of reality, the 5 spontaneous wisdom lights. We see these as somewhere that we're invoking Longchenpa, at the same time also recognizing that these exist spontaneously within our own unconfused disposition. And we supplicate then that we may, on the basis of invoking him, that we may recognize the primordially pure mind and also master the 4 stages of Ati Yoga, meaning the 4 stages of gradually realizing the nature of luminosity in an increasingly great degree. This particularly refers to then what we call the practice of Chögyam within the great perfection. Let's see what we have here. Yeah, revelation of Dharmata, increasing experience, maturation of light, and exhausting Dharmata. So these are then the 4 stages of Ati Yoga, associated with what we call inner Ati Yoga. Okay, so see if we can. Was it 284? No, we can't. Was it 484? Let's see. I'm gonna. No, it was a bit further, wasn't it? Let's see. Yeah, I'll see if some of you remember. 584. Thank you. What were the 5 spontaneous wisdom lights? These are the ground of manifestation. So when they're not recognized for what they are, these then become the sort of gross perception of what we have as in terms of both our subject and object, the solid external world with the 5 elements, and the internal experience of self in terms of 5 skandhas. But these are the basic. This is the basic ground of our nature. It's one way of referring to it. Okay, go to location 584. Yeah, okay. I'll take one more question though that came in first. No, actually, well, yes, because it's what we are going to be dealing with here. There's someone who's asking, is this, and this is basic to the discussion here, so it's relevant at this point. It's really the question of we do not exist, therefore the world exists. Would this be why the Theravadan tradition says there's no self, however phenomena exist? No, this is very different. And here, when we say non-existence, we're merely saying that non-existence doesn't exclude or preclude that phenomena arise, but they never ever attain existence as such. And that's where there's a little bit of disagreement there with, and like I say, I'm not educated within the Theravada tradition, so I wouldn't know what they're saying or not saying. But certainly when we in the Mahayana speak about the Hinayana, we talk about this place where you assert a subtle notion of consciousness, which of course is associated with no self, but still saying, even though it's a dependent arising, there are still moments of consciousness, and attribute solidity to these moments. And they're also saying that even though phenomena also are empty, they're subtle, indestructible particles, atoms basically. So in that sense, the Hinayana assert a certain degree of existence, and that's this we refer to as a subtle obscuration, where there's still some substance that is held as being ultimately true. And certainly within the Mahayana and also very much in the Vajrayana, then the foundation is really understanding how there's nothing that has any solid existence, but the degree to which we understand that, then also the experience of reality and its manifest qualities, like the 5 wisdom lights and what we're talking about in terms of Vajra nature, mandala deity, and so on, then manifests, but never ever is there the assumption that this is something solidly existing. So this is very much then what we concluded the discussion with last time. And we are talking about non-existence. Perhaps just on that note, I'll just take the last, as I did last time, I'll take the last paragraph we ended on last time and sort of start with that and then go from there. Trungpa says, the development of indestructibility or immovability is extremely important to understand. Such indestructibility can only come out of the state of nothingness, egolessness, or non-existence. According to the Buddha, Tantra is greater liberation, greater discipline, and greater vision. But this greater liberation is based on working with the potentialities and energies that exist within us. Therefore, without having some understanding of non-existence, there is no point in discussing indestructibility. So with indestructibility, we mean Buddha nature. We mean the quality that is unconditional. But this unconditional quality refers to, of course, the entire range of everything there is. And while in the general Buddhist vehicle, we're very interested in actually getting the point that none of this phenomena, in terms of both our subjective experience and also the objective experience of the world, has true existence. And that's where this non-existence, voidness, egolessness, and so on is such an important point. But we can within that recognition, we also discover that all the phenomena, they exist as an expression of this, and aligning ourselves with this, integrating the vision of this display within the non-existence, within the, you could say, emptiness, within the luminosity, aligning ourselves with this display and integrating this as our experience. This enables us to, in an immediate degree, really, to begin to to be present within this awakened condition. And so that's where the Vajrayana takes this awakened condition as the ground, the understanding that we actually are taught in the Heart Sutra, the unity of appearance and emptiness. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form, etc. So that is the foundation of this indestructibility, and that is what we take as the vehicle, and that's why we talk about a Vajra vehicle, a Vajrayana. And basically Vajra here refers then to Buddha nature. But this is something that we're not just talking about then in terms of a sort of a philosophical system. This is yoga. So this is where we're applying this. We have hopefully have a foundation in terms of a discipline of meditation where we discover simplicity, where we discover warmth, and we integrate this as the foundation in terms of the Hinayana and the Mahayana. And particularly, we would consider then this is also fueled by a determination to be free, understanding the painful experience of samsara. There is this quality of revulsion, determination to get out, and determination also to serve others, that others need to get out too. Sentient beings are locked inside the delusion and we wish to free them. But here we're being introduced then to the vision of how freedom exists spontaneously within ourselves, and this is very much done on the basis of our ability to connect with enlightenment through the teacher. So there's this strong sense of the value of the lived embodiment of enlightenment, and that's why we're taking our cues from the lineage masters, not just in terms of intellectual information, but also through the modality or the path of bhakti or devotion that enables us to be sensitive to something that lies outside of the ordinary rational mind and connect with this unconditional quality within. So hence we invoke the lineage. And speaking of which, then on your left side you have Dilgu Khyentse Rinpoche. This is taken in Lhasa in the 1950s. So, Trungpa Rinpoche continues, when we consider someone to be indestructible, we generally mean he is well established in his discipline. Such a person who has mastered the art of warfare or studied philosophy in great depth. But such a person has mastered all sorts of techniques and training. We therefore consider him to be immovable or indestructible. In fact, from the tantric point of view, the attempt to secure oneself with gadgetry is a source of vulnerability rather than indestructibility. In this case, we're not talking about indestructibility based on collecting information, tricks, or ideas. Instead, we are referring to a basic attitude of trust in the non-existence of our being. So great beings are not strong on the basis of having built up this strength to some sort of Olympic degree, sort of a spiritual Bruce Lee of sorts, sort of the indestructible warrior who is both smart and knows everything, but rather this is about being true to or sensitized to or aware of the truth that abides within ourselves, our unconditional worth. In the tantric notion of indestructibility, there is no ground, no basic premise, and no particular philosophy except one's own experience, which is extremely powerful and dynamic. It is a question of being rather than figuring out what to be, how to be. Usually we rely upon reference points, conceptual ideas, and feedback to give us guidelines as how to be good or bad boys and girls. But such dependence is questionable. If you say to your doctor, I have insomnia, how can I fall asleep? The doctor responds by saying, take these pills, then you will have no problem. In America in particular, that approach has become a problem. In Tantra, the point is not how to handle ourselves, but that we simply have to do it. We cannot trick ourselves into realizing the state of immovability or indestructibility. Indestructibility is based on our experience, which is solid, dynamic, and unyielding. So this is also an important point, because very often we think, oh, we got to figure it out, you know, how exactly is this? And it's very helpful, as we're doing now, to have the inspiration of the value of this, to have the understanding of the basic logic is sound, and also trust in the lineage. But exactly to understand what we're talking about, we have to humbly acknowledge this is going to be based on our developing the experience. We're going to have to go through the process, and so that's where it's about something that we just simply have to do. It's not about that we can act enlightened or say enlightened things or be enlightened or do enlightenment or whatever. It's about us actually undertaking the path, doing it. We have this all the time in life. We go through situations where we actually don't know what's going to happen, and we might imagine, you know, what will happen, but very often, rarely actually do things play out the way that we think they'll do. And so at the end, we realize how futile our speculations about what might come and our worries or expectations or hopes or whatever. Their human nature, there's nothing wrong with it, but they have very little to do with actually what ends up playing out. And this, of course, applies here. So the tantric discipline is not about giving us something we can lean onto or some particular methods. We do them, but they're not really what define the tantric journey itself. So Trungpa continues, in that way, tantric discipline does not cooperate with any deception at all. Therefore, it is regarded as indestructible, immovable. The tantric notion of non-participation in the games that go on in the samsaric world, however, is something more than boycotting. When we boycott something, we do so in the name of a protest. We disagree with certain systems or certain ideas, and therefore we make a nuisance of ourselves. In this case, instead of boycotting the samsaric setup, we are fully and personally involved with it. We realize all the so-called benefits that the samsaric world might present to us, spiritual, psychological, and material goods of all kinds. We are fully aware of all the alternatives, but we do not yield to any of them at all. We're straightforward and hard-headed. This is the quality of immovability. And also, those of you who are familiar with tantric sadhana will know that tantric sadhana actually accommodates the notion of our case history, our process, our role as an individual, and yet introduces through these then the dimension of purity and the purity of awakening as it plays out in our experience. So very much within the methodology of Tantra, we accommodate some of the existing practices that we find in the ordinary world. We make offerings. We make amendments on the path. We relate to the world, and we do so very wholeheartedly. But at the same time, it's permeated by a different vision, a vision of this immutability, this unconditional quality. The word hard-headed is very interesting. When we say somebody is hard-headed, we mean that he is not taken in by anything. That is precisely what is meant by the term Vajra nature. Hard-headed, Vajra-headedness. Vajra is a quality of toughness and not being taken in by any kind of seduction. We also talk about hard truth. Such truth is hard, unyielding, and uncomplimentary. When we receive news of somebody's death, it is the hard truth. We cannot go back and say that it's not true. We cannot hire an attorney to argue the case or spend our money trying to bring the person back to life, because it is the hard truth. In the same way, Vajra nature is hard truth. We cannot challenge or manipulate it in any way. It's both direct and precise. And this, of course, is also what we mean with understanding the view. When we're practicing the path, and particularly in the Vajra nature, we're being true to what is, and that's also why we would sometimes talk about the serious consequences of being not true to ourselves. When we talk about breaking samaya, it's really about violating the truth within ourselves, and this truth is genuinely who we are. So there's, in some sense, no higher crime, and so that's where this Vajra nature that we are integrating on the path here is something that, to some extent, we actually have no choice. If we're dedicated to truthfulness, then this is something that we simply have to abide by. But it's also the key to awakening. It's by ignoring this nature that we wander in samsara. So Trungpa Rinpoche says the term Vajra in Sanskrit, or Dorje in Tibetan, means having the qualities of a diamond. Like a diamond, Vajra is tough and at the same time extremely precious. Unless we undertake this basic Vajra quality of Tantra, or of the Tantrika, this almost bull-headed quality of not yielding to any kind of seductions, to any little tricks or plays on words, we cannot understand Vajrayana Buddhism at all. So again, this is so much connected with being sensitized to the teacher and being open to the teacher. So the whole process is in some way very solid, but then again, it's also very real. And once we are then on the path, then it's very much driven by this unconditional truthfulness. This is then this bullheaded quality Trungpa Rinpoche talks about. Trungpa Rinpoche very often also talks about the sort of the stubborn quality of the Tantrikas. Particularly talks about this when he describes his own Kagyu lineage, being stubborn practitioners. Fundamentally speaking, indestructibility or Vajra nature is basic sanity. It is the total experience of Tantra, the experience of the enlightened state of being. This sanity is based on the experience of clarity, which comes from the practice of meditation. Through the meditation practice of the three yanas, we discover a sense of clarity, unconditional clarity. Such clarity is ostentatious and has immense brilliance. It is very joyful and it has potentialities of everything. It is real experience. Once we have experienced this brilliance, this far-seeing, ostentatious, colorful, opulent quality of clarity, then there is no problem. That is Vajra nature. It is indestructible. Because of its opulence and its richness, it radiates constantly, and immense unconditional appreciation takes place. The combination of indestructibility and clarity is the basic premise of Tantric Buddhist teaching. So through the practice of meditation, there is a familiarity with how we exist beautifully without you could say, the weight of our ordinary narratives, projections, and so forth. We're connecting with openness. But within this openness, then also there's the confidence of wisdom. And so this is then Trungpa Rinpoche here describes in terms of this brilliance that is then even opulent. And that's where then it makes sense then when we understand this nature, not just in terms of its absence of confusion, but also in terms of its manifest qualities of enlightenment. Sometimes we talk about, the Tibetan teachings will talk about then Toni Namkun Choden, which means that emptiness which is endowed with all the qualities. And that's then where we talk about this as being, Trungpa Rinpoche used the phrase here, that it has the potentialities of everything. And that's why it makes a lot of sense to describe this in terms of deity. Trungpa Rinpoche says, we should understand how the Vajrayana notion of brilliance differs from the notion of clear light, as described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and how it differs from the Mahayana notion of luminosity. Clear light, according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is purely a phenomenological experience. You see whiteness as you die or as your consciousness begins to sink. Because the physical data of your body's habitual patterns are beginning to dissolve, you begin to enter another realm. You feel whitewashed, as if you were swimming in milk or drowning in milk. You feel suffocated with whiteness, which is known as clear light. This is purely a phenomenological experience, not the true experience of clarity. On the other hand, the Mahayana Buddhists talk about luminosity, called pravishwara in Sanskrit, or wursel in Tibetan. Wursel means seeing things very precisely, clearly, logically, and skillfully. Everything is seen very directly. Things are seen as they are. Nevertheless, neither pravishwara nor the notion of clear light match the tantric notion of Vajra clarity. So here I should confess my ignorance on some of this, and we very often talk about how at the moment of death there is the clear light, the moment of you could say, where body and mind separate, and also this moment where then the various potentials that we have in our being sort of merge into this blackout, from which then there arises this clarity. And sometimes this is described in terms of the moment that we could recognize the ultimate nature. Trungpa Rinpoche here, however, seems to be saying that there's also this phenomenology or physical phenomenology in terms of what we're perceiving, this whiteness. So that sounds more like where there's also sort of almost a tactile experience of whiteness, of clarity, and so forth. This, however, also you do find in the teachings on the moment of death. But anyway, I would like to make it quite clear I'm certainly not an authority on some of these really subtle aspects of Vajrayana science. But we do in the general Buddhist teaching, of course, talk about the nature of the mind being luminous. And this means then that the nature of the mind is brilliant, that it is unconfused, and so forth. But then again, in the Vajrayana, then luminosity takes on the whole, really including all aspects of manifestation. So that's where then the tantric notion of Vajra clarity is you could say extends beyond just the general untainted quality of the nature of mind as it's described in terms of Buddha nature and in the general Buddhist teaching. So Trungpa Rinpoche says Vajrayana clarity has more humor. It also has more subtlety and dignity. Moreover, it is utterly, totally outrageous. Things are seen as they are, precisely, but at the same time, things are also seeing us precisely. Because we are totally exposed and open and not afraid to be seen, a meeting point occurs. Something makes us realize that we cannot chicken out and say that our life is just a rehearsal. Something makes us realize that it is real. That state of being is not merely a phenomenological experience. It is a real state of being, a true state of being that is full and complete. That indestructibility and clarity of Vajra nature, which is superior to any other approach to spirituality, even within the Buddhist tradition. So here Trungpa Rinpoche then speaks about how this effulgence or this manifestation, this bursting forth of wisdom then plays out in terms of the yoga of the Vajrayana. I would also like here to just humbly step down as someone representing Trungpa Rinpoche's words and just have to say I'm utterly blown away by Trungpa Rinpoche's writing, and definitely also praising the transcribers and so forth, but above all Trungpa Rinpoche's blessing, because what we have here is really words that take you beyond the words. I remember Larry Mermelstein once sharing a story about Trungpa Rinpoche coming to lecture at his old sort of alumni context at his old university, and Trungpa Rinpoche speaking in ways that, as far as Larry could concern, was pretty incomprehensible. But Larry's old teacher came up and said, "That was remarkable. I've never seen anyone who to such a degree showed how language can take you beyond language." And anyway, the point being really here that this is these kind of, this is where there's such immense value in reading things like this again and again. And every time that you're going to revisit reading this, it will, of course, bring with it so much more understanding. Okay. Really, so much in all Trungpa Rinpoche's writings. Songtse Khyentse Rinpoche, I think I mentioned this before, sees Trungpa Rinpoche's writings as tantras. And also Trungpa Rinpoche was a treasure revealer. Even though he didn't speak about it, really, then it's something that we know now. And there's so many treasure teachings that we have from Trungpa Rinpoche. And of course, people like Dilgu Khyentse Rinpoche knew this. And so, Dilgu Khyentse Rinpoche was the first really to express the deepest awe of Trungpa Rinpoche. And what we have is really a Mahasiddha who arrived in the modern world fully accomplished. And as an expression of this tremendous, what he actually describes here, really the qualities that are being described here really were basic to Trungpa Rinpoche's ability to embrace and digest, and then, you could say, use the modern idiom as a vehicle for communicating enlightenment. Absolutely extraordinary. Here you see the Kala Chakra mandala. A few details to visualize. I think we're talking about 700 something deities in there. See if there's what they say about this. Mandala Kala Chakra, a two-dimensional representation of the mandalas of body, speech, and mind of the Kala Chakra Tantra. You sometimes have what's called, I think it's called Rolang. Yeah. The three-dimensional mandalas. If you go to the Potala and Lhasa, they actually have the Kala Chakra mandala created as actually a three-dimensional model in metal and all sorts of different precious stones and materials. Beautiful, very, very impressive. But of course, this is then again what we're talking about here, an expression of this quality, this, say, opulent, manifest quality of enlightenment. There's different mandalas then, and while the Kala Chakra mandala is very much the scope of a king, a ruler, and so forth, and also it's because of its incredible profundities given in terms of something that's the basis for establishing world peace and is a great blessing and so forth. While you have that kind of mandala, then also, of course, you have mandalas that are different mandalas, different expressions of enlightenment according to different contexts. Anyway, we're going to have a look at that now. So, Trungpa Rinpoche says, so the chapter 3, mandala, Trungpa Rinpoche says, there are three worlds presented in the Tantric tradition: the world of perceptions, the world of the body, and the world of emotions. Our relationship with the world of perceptions is called the outer mandala. Our relationship with the world of the body is called the inner mandala. And our relationship with the world of emotions is called the secret mandala. So first, outer mandala. We're constantly engaged in relationships with the ordinary world. That is, the world of ayatanas or the six perceptions: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling, and thinking. These are then what we generally refer to as the five senses, but also here we include as a sense perception, thinking. So here Trungpa Rinpoche then, I'll let him finish his sentence, by the way. Sorry. So the six sense perceptions: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling, and thinking, the process which coordinates the other five. In Buddhism, thinking is considered to be one of the senses. Our different perceptions are constantly being coordinated into a mandala. By mandala, we mean interlocking relationships rather than an extraordinary magical circle. Mandala is simply the coordination of one point with another. For instance, in filmmaking, the visual material is edited and the sound has to be edited as well, so that the two work together. The same thing happens in everyday life. When we enter a restaurant, we hear the clattering of pots and pans and we begin to smell the food. At that point, we may either get turned on or turned off by the restaurant's mandala. Or someone might introduce a friend to us. This is a good friend of mine. I would like you to meet him. We say, how are you? And we sit down and talk with that person. That person speaks and behaves in a certain way, and we begin to feel that we like him, either on the grounds of our friend's recommendation or because we feel it is worthwhile to associate with such a person. Perhaps our car is breaking down and we stop at a gas station. One of the passengers decides to step out and ask the attendant how far it is to the next motel. From the way the person behaves, when he brings back the message, we can tell whether the answer is going to be favorable or disappointing. In that way, we always have a feeling about what is taking place. So, I think this is fairly self-explanatory. Gas, by the way, is the American word for petrol. So this is again Trungpa's brilliance in terms of sort of honing in on what we mean with the experience of mandala. Of course, mandala by definition, chilko, means center and circumference. So that's the definition of mandala, just the etymology of it. But in terms of what it involves in terms of experience, then if we're just told, well, the mandala is the sort of the center and the circumference, the main deity, and then the deities around, what are we going to do with that? So that's why it's so immensely valuable when somebody actually begins to give an intuitive presentation of what we're talking about. According to Tantra, Trungpa says, that feeling or intuitive setup is a part of the external world. It is part of an actual relationship. Something is happening, or for that matter, something is not happening. Nevertheless, there is an actual relationship taking place constantly. Our experience of that relationship is not particularly based on superstition. We simply have a personal experience of the whole situation, a sense of the reality of mandala. So again, we cannot overstate the value of or the presence or the reality of our experience of the phenomenal world. It is constantly there. We continually find ourselves in dynamic situations like what are being described here. So this has a prominent role in terms of our existence, to say the very least. The outer mandala principle is the possibility of relating with a situation as a cohesive structure. Some setups are unpleasant, destructive, and unworkable. Other setups are creative, workable, and pleasant. Mandalas are the general patterns, whether pleasant or unpleasant, that link us to the rest of the world, which is our world or our creation in any sense. So, of course, this is uniquely, each and every one of us have our particular world and have our unique experience of any given particular situation. So, while we're not sort of falling into some sort of idea that everything, I'm just alone and this is all just my dream. Of course, we would say that this reality is intangible, but we also talk about, yes, it has a reality of some sort. It's not solid the way we think it is. It is, but it is very much, it is something that the way that we perceive things is very much our creation. So we can say there is a phenomenal world, and we can say that it doesn't have any true existence, and yet we do construct a particular reality on the basis of our being situated within within this world. So we can talk about this being the world as being our mind, or it being our creation. When we begin to work with reality properly, an enormous takes place between us and the external world. That rapport is taking place constantly, some kind of network or system of relations. It is as if something were circulating. For instance, when we're just about to catch the flu, we feel that the world is not particularly favorable to us. Whatever we experience and whatever we feel is somewhat strange. we feel that something is not quite clicking. We feel numb and unhealthy already. The world outside seems too solid, and we cannot relate that solidity to the softness or vulnerability in ourselves. This is when we're getting the flu, right? The world seems hardened and heavy, and we cannot seem to make any connection with it. Those are the signs of fever and approaching flu. Although they seem to signal a discrepancy in our relationship with the world, that experience itself is an example of mandala principle. So this is where we begin to have some sense of the flavor of the world, the vivid flavor of the world. Of course, in this case, then the flu. If you have these symptoms, please get a test. Anyway, according to the tantric tradition, the outer mandala principle is the external world and how we relate with it. However, the emphasis on relationship does not mean that the world is regarded as an intuitive or purely subjective world. It is simply the external world. So this is where, again, it's important we don't fall into this sort of thing we call solipsism, where we just think, oh yeah, it's just, there's nothing there. It's just I'm completely making this up. There is a world, but of course, we have a particular style of engaging with it. We have a particular place, an empowerment in terms of our experience of the world. For instance, Trungpa says, the outer mandala is connected with how we relate with hot and cold. If we are outdoors in a hot climate and we walk into a highly air-conditioned building, we may get sick because we're not able to handle hot and cold properly. Our coordination with the world may not be quite right. Usually we experience such problems when we ignore the relationship between the world outside and our own world, our body. If we do not acknowledge our sense perceptions properly and thoroughly, we find ourselves in trouble. Not because what we perceive is poisonous, but because how we perceive has become incompetent, haphazard, or confused, and therefore it has turned into poison. From that point of view, we cannot say that the phenomenal world we're living in, the traffic jams and the pollution and the inflation, is bad and devilish. We cannot condemn the world or put it into those kind of conceptual packages. That approach does not work, because it means that we're fighting with our own phenomena. Phenomena are ours. It is our country, our air, our earth, our food, our water, our electricity, our policemen. When we talk about the mandala setup, we are speaking of an organic reality. We're not saying that we should reorganize the world or that we should fight for it. We're talking about how we could look at it in an organic, natural way. The world could evolve itself according to our enlightenment, naturally. If you are a political activist, you might have difficulty in understanding this seemingly wishy-washy philosophy. You might say, don't we have to speak up? Don't we have to do something? But when we talk about the tantric level of perception, we're not talking about concocting something. The outer mandala's principle purely refers to actual immediate relationships, visual, auditory, and conceptual relationships with the so-called world outside. Okay, we're gonna break here. We're going to be discussing this more. And this is, of course, a very important point, really, in terms of what we're doing in terms of the Vajrayana, integrating then our experience of the world. This becomes very much the foundation for our entire tantric journey, namely beginning to see the purity of the world around us. Trungpa here speaks of it in terms of it being organic, and also very much in terms of it working on the basis of our, what he says, enlightenment. So that's where it's of course there has to, sometimes things need to be done, there's certain activities that might be required, but without us actually seeing the world for what it is, then we very often fail, and it's as if we're not really connected to the organic quality of our reality. And that's where the sort of aggressive style that he's referring to here in terms of activism sometimes fails in succeeding. Okay, we're 10 to 10, so we'll see if there's any questions. Okay. Mhm. Okay, someone saying, very, very beautiful to remember the intention. Yeah, that's really essential with everything we do, even in terms of our ordinary life. You know, checking our intention and intending. You could say intending the best for others. Can you say more how a tantric practitioner would handle insomnia? Would you just stick with the experience of insomnia? No, you would do something, and occasionally I have insomnia, and the method is there's various methods. You would ideally not get caught up in the ordinary sort of thoughts that very often come around insomnia, and also you would invoke the atmosphere that is associated with deity or guru, and of course we have the practices of remembering the guru in one's heart. So of course, sometimes if we're if we're serious insomniacs, we might have to put up with boredom in the sense that we're still there, still invoking the method. But there's very much a sense that this also is sort of part of our journey, and this is in some way a blessing. It sounds like Chögyam Trungpa was unimpressed by protests and demonstrations of the 60s against the war. Well, I think Chögyam Trungpa would never have encouraged being impassive. But of course, at during the time of some of these lectures, of course, you had things like the Kent State incidents where the police shot 4 of the students dead, and you had so much unrest in terms of the society. So some of this obviously worked, and some of it didn't. But I think Trungpa's point is not so much about what we do or don't do, but it's more about the intentions behind it, and that's fair. If we uniquely think in terms of actions without attending to the what's behind it, then our likelihood of succeeding in our objective might fail. What does he mean with "we can't understand Vajrayana at all"? I don't know. I don't think he's saying that. I think he's probably just saying it's subtle, yeah. So whiteness appears at death is not equal to clarity, but may provide an opportunity or portal to Vajra clarity? Possibly yes, but like I said, I made a bit of a disclaimer there. I'm not an authority of this, but possibly yes. Yes, Trungpa Rinpoche is amazing in using language to take us beyond language. And it's not even his native language. That's true. It's not Trungpa Rinpoche's native language, but at the same time, he speaks as a native. So many Tibetan teachers very humbly actually will just say, well, I'm sort of a visitor in this neighborhood. I'm sort of is this what you call it? Songtse Rinpoche very much adopts this approach of, which is also very wise because it's a very non-committed approach, you could say. Saying, don't you people say this, And so there's a sense of being a visitor with Trungpa Rinpoche. He always speaks as if he was really a Native American or a native to American society, modern American society. Can you say a bit about the hard-headed Vajra quality that is needed for Vajrayana and how it aligns with qualities of being open and spacious? Well, you trust your nature. You trust the Vajra nature, you trust the path, you trust the teacher. And so that very much is about being open. You trust the teacher's openness. You trust the spaciousness of your own sadhana, your own meditation practice. Okay, it is a great explanation of its relate to the modern world. Yeah. So mandala can be seen as expressing the infinite network of connections of existence experience. Yes, it's mandala. We mean really the whole gamut of all our experience, and that's where then this is the foundation for the entire Vajrayana journey. So is this suggesting that enlightenment is characterized by full awareness of every connection in every situation? I think so, yes. Pure view of flu, wonderful. Well, the flu here is yes, it's indicative. We can, someone says, such good stuff. Yes. What if people had not protested? Oh, there you go. Of course. Yeah. Yes, there were so many tragic things that happened. What if people had not protested the use of defoliants that burn children? Absolutely. Yeah. What was it? Agent Orange and napalm and all of that. I remember in Denmark we were protesting against that. And of course, yes. So we're not, and again, like I just said, Trungpa is not suggesting that you're not politically active and so forth, but he's suggesting he's you could say bringing more intelligence to that will enable greater success in these protests. Okay, then somebody says deity and melatonin gummies for insomnia. Well, yes, these are then, you could say, external remedies. Well, deity, not really. I'm not sure about melatonin gummies. That sounds a little bit like that's an external solution. But yeah. So the best activism is putting our meditation practice into action in our daily lives. Yes, if our activism is informed by meditation practice, then we're just much more aware of what we're working with, and we're both seeing the potential in the other, as well as drawing on our own intelligence and potential. Could you repeat what you said about Vajra clarity? Well, there's the point really where Trungpa is talking about how the Vajrayana luminosity extends beyond what we would, in the general Buddhist teaching, understand as clarity, which is the understanding in Buddha nature, where we would simply say form is emptiness, emptiness is form. We would say there is nothing that is objectifiable, tangible, ultimately existent. And this is what we refer to with emptiness. And it is imbued with, at the same time, this cognitive quality that is the quality of our mind, which is unconfused and clear. And so that's how we would generally understand Buddha nature. And this, of course, is basic to Vajrayana as well. But in the Vajrayana, we talk about the Vajra clarity in terms of all the way that we would say the whole realm of apparent phenomena manifest. And that's where we would speak about the whole sort of the all-pervasive quality of luminosity, of this Vajra clarity that arises then where the whole, you could say, range of phenomenal existence arises as the expression of enlightenment. And that's then where we begin the discussion on mandala and the Vajrayana sense of luminosity. Again, is he saying they went about it wrong? Well, I think he's more sort of, he would like to support them in their activism and suggest how it could be done better. And of course, so much of the confrontations between the authorities and those resisting the authorities and so on, didn't actually play out in a very constructive way, like I said about Kent State and also so many other places. Yeah, very hard confrontations between different factions, resulting in loss of lives and also the issues really being confused, and ultimately sort of within the context of the conflict, then also the intelligence implicit in some of the messages that were being made being lost, and maybe lost, in the long run as well, which is also sad. Can you speak a bit more about the inner and secret mandalas? Trungpa Rinpoche will be doing that in the context of this chapter. Can activism be done tantrically with intention of highlighting connections otherwise not seen? Very much. I remember when I was living in Lismore, we were a little cell of Buddhists who were, at the same time, some of us were involved with some of the resistance against. I remember it was the fracking, the sort of the exploitation of the natural gases in the underground. And there was an event out at a place I think called Bentley, and some people were involved in that. And I think the discussions we had at the time were very much about how we could mingle activism with meditation. So that, I guess, we could call tantric activism to some extent. I, of course, was guilty of not being proactive. I'm very grateful to those who actually were out at Bentley and did the job there. We're on the barricades. Please say more about humor in Vajrayana. Well, I think Trungpa will do that in the context of the text. Yeah. But I would also like to say one thing about humor in the general sense, which is very much, humor is actually very much linked to Vipassana, because humor is very much often about us seeing the sort of the aerial perspective, you know, the comedy of, you know, how, let's say, people from two different cultures misunderstanding each other. And if you're standing outside and you understand both of them, it's kind of funny, you know. So that's where humor has the Vipassana quality of aerial perspective and also the warmth. Very often, of course, we're not talking about laughing at people or at situations, but also laughing with situations. And that's where also Vipassana comes with that tenderness. So that's where humor can be very tender. That's actually in Australia, you know, you have the cartoonist Lunik, and his humor is very much, you could say, informed or permeated by a warmth, a sort of a sympathy with the human condition that makes this a very endearing kind of humor. So that's where, in the general sort of quality of Vipassana, we have this aerial perspective, wider perspective that enables us to understand the dichotomies we have, and also it's infused with this compassion. So that's why humor in some way can be seen as possessing, humor in the best sense can possess these qualities of wisdom and compassion. Hi Jakob, how does a tantric practitioner work with the mental distractions? Well, beginning with actually the discipline of meditation right at the very fundamental level, and that sort of continues up through the path. What the tantric practitioner eventually is able to do is, of course, see the entire or everything that appears in terms of as a display of this luminosity or this Vajra clarity. But of course, this all requires the discipline of meditation that begins to cut through the ordinary distraction and the seductions and deceptions that ordinary distractions really bring about. So basic to this then, for any practitioner, is the practice of shamatha, sitting practice, and so on. Okay. So now, of course, we're going over time, and like I've said earlier, I'm happy to do that. So those of you who need to log off, please feel free to do so. We are past 10 o'clock, but I'll just take the questions that come in here. Yeah. Maybe better to ask this question this way: how does a tantric practitioner deal with mental distractions? Yeah, well, like that. The tantric practitioner's path is founded on the general discipline of meditation. Of course, the tantric practitioner then brings into the perspective a different understanding of who he or she is. And so there's a little bit, you could say, a lighter attitude towards distractions. But that also does come from a foundation of training. Then someone says, Chögyam Trungpa might say that to create an enlightened society, one starts by discovering enlightenment at home. Yes, thank you very much. That's a good comment actually to some of the discussions about political activism. Indeed, yes. That was so helpful mentioning Luning. Thank you. Work with the system to help the cause. Is that tantric activism? Yes, I think so. Yeah, you're not necessarily subscribing to the system, but you're not carried away or deceived by the system's basic premises, but you're willing to work with the system, with a perspective of wisdom. Yeah. And some of those Bentley activists are hugely grateful for your tantric guidance. It made a huge difference in some very challenging situations, so that's good. As an analogy, Is the subtle existence posited in Hinayana in a way like a Newtonian view that is based on discrete atomic particles, whereas Vajrayana is more akin to quantum physics, where one finds open space? I suppose as a working thesis, we could say that, yes, yes. It's interesting, the Tibetan word for the subtle particles is actually Dulchen Chame, which means indestructible particles, subtle particles. But actually, that's really what atom means. Atom cannot be divided. Yeah. So the sort of the atomic, the sort of basic atomic idea of standard model of physics is, of course, is challenged by the findings of quantum physics, where again, yes, you find open space, and also very much where you find the engagement of the subject as being part of that space. So people are saying thank you, thank you. Hi, bro Jakob. There are certain questions I like to send you on private in email. Is that possible? Okay, that's all right. All right. So I think we'll conclude here, and glad if this is good. Thank you very much. Yeah. So okay, we'll dedicate. Through this virtue, may all beings throughout existence awaken together without a single being left behind. In the pure realm of the luminous essence, the ground of the great perfection, may they remain inseparable from the kayas and wisdoms. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we are born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you.